The natron crystals scrape against your palms like coarse salt as you reach deep into the limestone jar. Almost instantly, the acrid scent of the drying agent floods your nose sharper than the desert wind, more lingering than the incense that forever clouds the air in this house of purification. Before we go any deeper into this world of linen and ritual, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy these kinds of historical journeys. I'd also love to hear where you're re-listening from and what time it is where you are there. As something magical about sharing a quiet moment like this across so many time zones. Now, dim the lights and let yourself settle in as we begin tonight's story. It's the third day of the 70-day embalming process. Your fingers have started to grow used to this strange harvest of preservation, but your nose still resists. The scent of cedar oil, myrrh, and something indescribably organic clings to every surface, every breath. You are a Wab priest, one of the purified ones, and today, like every day for the past 3 years, you wake in the pre-dawn darkness of Memphis circa 1350 BCE. During the reign of Amenhotep III, when Egypt's wealth flows like the Nile's annual flood and death, has become the most elaborate performance art in human history. The limestone beneath your reed mat is cold against your bare shoulder, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the rhythmic scraping of chisels against stone. Always that sound, the endless preparation for journeys that will outlast empires. Your shaved head feels the morning chill first, as it always does. The daily ritual of removing every hair from your body isn't vanity, it's purification, a requirement so strict that even your eyebrows fall victim to the bronze razor every morning. The priests who work with the dead must be cleaner than the living, more perfect than the gods they serve. It's a cosmic joke, really. Spending your days making corpses presentable while turning yourself into something barely recognizable as human. The natron under your fingernails has been there so long, it feels like part of your skin now. This miraculous salt from the Wadi Natron, 40 miles northwest of Memphis, doesn't just preserve the dead, it transforms them into something between flesh and stone. You've seen bodies that have spent their full 70 days in the natron beds, and they emerge looking like leather that has been soaked, stretched, and forgotten in the sun. Beautiful in its own way, if beauty can be divorced entirely from life. The workshop around you hums with the kind of focused activity that only comes with practiced routine. Hekanati, the chief embalmer, moves between the stone tables with the casual confidence of a man who has opened more torsos than a battlefield surgeon. His hands, stained permanently brown from years of handling resins and oils, work with the delicate precision of an artist, which, in a sense, he is though his medium happens to be human remains, and his gallery is eternity. The body on the table before you belonged to Amenemhab, a minor official in the temple administration, who died 2 weeks ago of what the physicians called the fever that burns from within. His family has paid the middle-tier price for mummification, not the full royal treatment with the finest resins and gold, but certainly not the poor man's option of simple desiccation and cheap wrappings. Amenemhab will spend his afterlife in moderately comfortable circumstances, assuming the priests have done their job correctly. Your fingers work the natron into the cavity where his stomach once resided, feeling the strange resistance of tissue that is no longer quite tissue. The internal organs were removed on the first day, in a process that would make even the most hardened physician queasy. The brain, extracted through the nose with long bronze hooks in a procedure that combines surgical precision with what can only be described as aggressive fishing. The lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, each carefully preserved and wrapped separately before being placed in their respective canopic jars, watched over by the 4 sons of Horus. Imsidi guards the liver with his human head. Always seemed fitting, somehow, that the most human-looking of the 4 would protect the organ the Egyptians consider the seat of emotion. Dum-Utef, with his jackal head, watches over the stomach, perhaps because jackals know something about digestion that the rest of us have missed. Hapi, the baboon-headed one, protects the lungs, and Kebisinuf, with his falcon head, keeps watch over the intestines. It's a cosmic filing system that would make any bureaucrat weep with envy. The heart, of course, remains in the body. This isn't sentiment, it's practical theology. In the afterlife, Amenemhab's heart will be weighed against the feather of Mut, and if it proves heavier than truth itself, he'll be devoured by Ammit, that charming creature who combines the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. The ancient Egyptians really knew how to design a monster that would give you nightmares for multiple lifetimes. The natron draws moisture from everything it touches, including your own hands. Your skin has developed a permanent tightness, as if you're slowly being mummified yourself by proximity. There's a metaphor there that you try not to think about too often, especially on the longer days, when the line between the living and the preserved seems increasingly arbitrary. Outside, Memphis continues its daily dance of commerce and worship. The sound of wooden wheels on stone, the calls of vendors selling bread and beer, the lowing of cattle being driven to market, all the noise of a civilization so confident in its permanence that it can afford to spend ridiculous amounts of time and resources preparing for the next world. You can smell the Nile from here, that distinctive mix of mud and life that has defined this valley since before humans learned to scratch their names on stone. The wrapping will begin in 67 days, but already you can envision the process. Hundreds of yards of linen strips, each one carefully soaked in resin, each layer applied with the kind of attention to detail that would make a master weaver jealous. The fingers and toes wrapped individually first, then the limbs, then the torso, each layer building toward that characteristic silhouette that will define Amenemhab's appearance for eternity. Between the layers, amulets will be placed with mathematical precision. The heart scarab over the chest, inscribed with Chapter 30b of the Book of the Dead, essentially a cheat sheet for the afterlife, instructing Amenemhab's heart not to bear witness against him during the weighing. It's like having a lawyer present during divine judgment, which seems both practical and slightly unethical. The workshop is warm despite the early hour, heated by braziers that never fully go out. The priests work in various states of undress, partly for comfort, partly because clothing absorbs the smells that cling to everything here. You've grown accustomed to the odor, that particular mixture of decay and preservation that seems to follow you everywhere. Your wife mentioned it last week, in that delicate way wives have of suggesting their husbands might benefit from additional bathing. Hekanekti approaches with a fresh batch of resin, heated until it flows like honey, but smells like the dreams of trees. This particular mixture comes from the Lebanon cedars, brought down the Mediterranean coast and up the Nile at enormous expense. The wealthy dead smell better than most of the living, which strikes you as either deeply unfair or cosmically appropriate, depending on your philosophical mood. The process of mummification is really an exercise in controlled corruption, preventing the body from returning to the earth while simultaneously transforming it into something that was never quite alive to begin with. It's engineering on a spiritual level, a technology for cheating death that requires equal parts chemistry, theology, and raw stubborn optimism. You remember your first body, 3 years ago, a young woman who had died in childbirth, her infant placed beside her in the sarcophagus, in a gesture that managed to be both heartbreaking and practical. A priest had explained the procedure with the casual efficiency of craftsmen discussing woodworking techniques, but your hands had shaken for days afterward. Now, your hands are steady, but sometimes you wonder if steadiness is really something to celebrate. The natron continues its patient work, drawing water from tissues that will never again know thirst. In the dim light of the oil lamps, Amenemhab's face has already begun to take on that distinctive shrunken appearance of the long dead. His features, once presumably animated by whatever combination of humor, ambition, and everyday worry that defines a minor temple official, have settled into the kind of profound stillness that makes you want to whisper. The canopic jars sit nearby, their tops carved in the likenesses of the protective gods. Each jar contains organs that were, until recently, processing Amenemhab's last meal, circulating his blood, filtering his breath. Now they rest in natron baths of their own, undergoing their separate transformation. It's oddly democratic. This division of the body into its constituent parts in death. The liver gets equal treatment with the brain, assuming you can afford the full service. Memphis at this hour is caught between night and morning, that liminal time when the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead feels most permeable. The great pyramids of Giza rise to the north, their limestone facings still gleaming in the early light. They've been ancient, even to your generation built more than 1,000 years ago, during the Old Kingdom, when pharaohs were buried with the kind of geometric confidence that seems almost alien now. The democratization of death has been the great innovation of your era. Where once only pharaohs could expect elaborate afterlife preparations, now any merchant or official with sufficient silver can purchase their own path to eternity. It's created a thriving industry of death embalmers, coffin makers, amulet carvers, linen weavers, all of them dependent on the Egyptian conviction that life continues after breathing stops. Your own afterlife preparations began the day you took this position. A portion of your wages goes automatically toward purchasing your own mummy wrappings, your own set of canopic jars, your own collection of protective amulets. It's like a pension plan for the permanently departed, and the irony isn't lost on you that you re-earning your own immortality by helping others achieve theirs. The natron has formed a crust around the body now, a shell of salt and time that will draw out every drop of moisture over the coming weeks. Amenemhab is disappearing into preservation, becoming less himself and more a vessel for whatever comes next. The priests speak of the Ka, the life force that will need this preserved body as an anchor in the afterlife. But you sometimes wonder if the Ka would recognize what we've made of its former home. The sound of chanting drifts from the adjacent chamber, where junior priests are conducting the daily recitations over yesterday's arrivals. The words are ancient, even by Egyptian standards, passed down through generations of priests who understood that death is really just another form of bureaucracy, one that requires the proper paperwork, filed in triplicate with appropriate divine witnesses. Your breakfast this morning was bread and beer, the same combination that has sustained Egyptian workers since before the pyramids rose from the desert floor. The bread was coarse, made from emmer wheat that leaves grit between your teeth, and the beer was thick enough to chew. It's the same meal that Amenemhab probably ate for most of his adult life, though he'll never taste bread again. Instead, he'll rely on the painted loaves and jars of food depicted on his coffin walls, sustained by artistic representation and priestly offerings for the millions of years ahead. The workshop contains 12 bodies in various stages of processing, assembly line of eternity that never quite stops. Some are fresh arrivals, still pink and soft in ways that make you remember they were recently walking around, worrying about taxes and weather. Others are nearing completion, their natron baths nearly finished, ready for the oil treatments that will restore some flexibility to their preserved flesh. The truly wealthy receive additional luxuries, gold leaf on their fingernails, jeweled amulets sewn between the linen layers, faces painted with the kind of cosmetics that cost more than most people earn in a year. Death, it turns out, is just another opportunity for conspicuous consumption, though the target audience for this particular display won't be able to appreciate the craftsmanship until they reach the afterlife. Hekanakti pauses beside you, examining your work with the critical eye of a master craftsman. His approval is nonverbal, a slight nod that indicates you've achieved the proper distribution of natron, the correct attention to the cavity's corners and recesses. In this business, precision matters. A poorly preserved mummy might not make it through the first century of eternity, let alone the millions of years the priests promise. The limestone walls around you are covered with hieroglyphic instructions, painted in the formal style It turns even the most mundane procedural details into something approaching art. The symbols march across the stone in neat rows, describing everything from proper organ removal techniques to the correct prayers for each stage of preservation. It's a manual for defeating death, written in a script that transforms practical information into sacred knowledge. Outside, the sun has fully risen, and with it comes the heat that will define the next 12 hours. Memphis in summer is an exercise in endurance. The air shimmers, with temperatures that turn stone too hot to touch and make even the lightest linen feel oppressive. But here in the House of Purification, the thick walls and high ceilings maintain a relative coolness that makes the long days bearable. The smell of baking bread drifts through the windows, mixing with the ever-present incense and natron to create a scent that is uniquely Egyptian, part kitchen, part temple, part laboratory. Somewhere in the city, people are beginning their daily routines, unaware that their future selves might very well end up on these same stone tables, undergoing the same transformation from person to artifact. You've learned to think of the bodies not as former people, but as projects, complex engineering challenges that require specific solutions. Amenemhab's particular challenges include some damage to his torso from whatever illness killed him, and a break in his left arm that happened either just before or just after death. These imperfections will be corrected during the wrapping process. Padding and positioning used to restore the illusion of physical perfection that the afterlife apparently requires. The canopic jars are works of art in their own right, carved from limestone and painted with pigments that cost more than most people's houses. The faces of the protective gods are rendered with a kind of idealized perfection that makes you wonder if the divine beings they represent ever look in mirrors and feel disappointed by the comparison. Each jar bears hieroglyphic inscriptions, identifying its contents and invoking the protection of its guardian deity, a cosmic filing system that would make any librarian weep with envy. The natron trade has made several families in Memphis extraordinarily wealthy. The salt deposits in the Wadi Natron are controlled by a merchant family that has managed to maintain its monopoly for 3 generations, selling the essential ingredient of immortality at prices that would make Pharaoh himself wince. It's capitalism at its most literal, trading in the currency of eternity. Your hands work automatically now, distributing the natron with the kind of muscle memory that comes from repetition. 3 years of this work has given you an intimate knowledge of human anatomy that rivals any physician's, though your patients are notably less talkative than those treated by conventional healers. The silence in the workshop is broken only by the soft sounds of preservation, the whisper of salt against tissue, the gentle scrape of bronze tools against stone. The junior priests move between the tables like acolytes in a very specialized temple, each one learning the precise techniques that separate successful mummification from expensive failure. The training takes years, and the standards are exacting. A poorly preserved body reflects on the entire establishment, potentially costing both reputation and future business. Memphis serves as the mummification center for much of Lower Egypt, its workshops processing bodies from throughout the Delta region. The wealthy dead arrive by boat, accompanied by mourning relatives and enough grave goods to stock a small market. The poor come with little more than hope, and whatever coins their families could scrape together, trusting that even basic preservation is better than returning to dust. The economic impact of the death industry on Memphis is substantial. Embalmers, coffin makers, amulet carvers, linen weavers, natron merchants, and a host of supporting crafts all depend on the steady stream of the recently deceased. It's a recession-proof business, as death maintains remarkably consistent market demand regardless of broader economic conditions. The theological implications of mummification continue to evolve as the practice becomes more widespread. The original royal prerogative of physical preservation has been extended to anyone who can afford it, democratizing immortality in ways that would have scandalized earlier generations. Some priests argue that this dilutes the divine nature of eternal life, while others maintain that the gods are generous enough to accommodate all sincere seekers of preservation. The afternoon shift will arrive in a few hours, bringing fresh hands and clear eyes to continue the work that never really stops. The rhythm of mummification operates independently of normal time bodies arrive when they arrive, and the 70-day process continues regardless of festivals, floods, or political upheavals. Death, it turns out, maintains its own schedule. Amenemhab's transformation continues beneath the natron crust, cellular moisture drawn away grain by grain, his tissues slowly assuming the leathery consistency that will characterize his physical presence for the next few millennia. By the time his mummy is complete, he will weigh perhaps a third of his living weight, concentrated into a form that bears only passing resemblance to the man who once worried about temple accounts and anniversary dinners. The art of facial reconstruction has reached remarkable sophistication in recent years. Embalmers have learned to stuff the cheeks with linen to restore something approaching lifelike appearance, and to position the features in expressions of peaceful dignity that probably bear no resemblance to how these people actually looked when alive. Death, apparently, comes with its own cosmetic requirements. The wealthy sometimes commission portrait masks that idealize their features beyond recognition, turning ordinary faces into visions of divine perfection. These masks serve both practical and theological functions, protecting the face during the long journey to the afterlife, while presenting the deceased in their most flattering possible light to whatever divine judges they might encounter. The workshop's acoustics are designed to muffle sound, creating an atmosphere of reverential quiet that seems appropriate for the transformation taking place. Conversations are conducted in whispers, and even the scrape of tools against stone seems muted by the heavy air and thick walls. It's a place that exists outside normal time, where the urgent concerns of daily life fade into irrelevance. Your own mortality has become both more abstract and more concrete since beginning this work. Abstract because constant exposure to death has made it seem less threatening, more like a technical challenge than an existential crisis. Concrete because every body on these tables represents someone who once had plans, concerns, and the complete certainty that death was something that happened to other people. The preservation techniques vary according to both budget and belief. The most expensive treatments include multiple applications of cedar oil, extensive use of precious resins, and decorative elements that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. The basic packages focus on essential preservation, with fewer luxuries, but the same fundamental goal of maintaining physical integrity through the afterlife. Quality control in mummification is largely a matter of professional reputation. A badly preserved body that deteriorates quickly becomes an advertisement for inferior workmanship, while successful mummies that remain intact for generations bring prestige and additional business. The best embalmers are known throughout Egypt, their techniques sought after by the wealthy and imitated by competitors. The social stratification of death mirrors that of life, with elaborate afterlife preparations serving as a final opportunity for conspicuous display. The pharaoh's mummy represents the pinnacle of preservation technology, while the poor make do with basic desiccation and minimal wrappings. In death, as in life, you get what you pay for. The religious texts that accompany each mummy are customized according to both the deceased as social status and their family as theological preferences. The wealthy receive complete copies of the Book of the Dead, with all the spells and incantations necessary for navigating the afterlife's bureaucratic challenges. The poor make do with abbreviated versions, focusing on the most essential passages for post-mortem survival. The natron beneath your fingernails has become a permanent feature, no amount of washing sufficient to remove the mineral residue that accumulates from daily handling. Your hands have developed a distinctive texture from constant exposure to preserving agents, becoming almost as leather-like as the bodies you work on. It's an occupational hazard that serves as a daily reminder of your profession. Amenemhab's preservation continues on schedule, his body slowly surrendering its moisture to the patient natron. In 67 days, he will be ready for the next phase of his transformation, the oils and resins that will restore some flexibility to his tissues, followed by the elaborate wrapping process that will give him his final form for eternity. The economics of afterlife preparation have created their own specialized markets. Linen weavers who work exclusively for mummification, producing the miles of bandages required for proper wrapping. Resin merchants who import their products from Lebanon and Nubia, trading in the aromatic substances that will preserve and perfume the dead. Amulet carvers who create the protective charms that will shield the deceased during their journey through the underworld. Memphis at midday pulses with the kind of heat that makes you understand why the ancient gods were so concerned with the sun's daily journey across the sky. The limestone buildings radiate warmth like ovens, and even the shadows provide only relative relief from temperatures that turn the air itself into something you have to push through rather than simply breathe. The continuity of Egyptian civilization rests partly on this obsession with preservation, not just of bodies, but of traditions, techniques, and beliefs that stretch back thousands of years. The hieroglyphic script you see on the workshop walls preserves knowledge in forms that will theoretically remain readable for millions of years, assuming anyone in the distant future retains the ability to decode them. The daily rhythm of mummification creates its own temporal framework, distinct from the agricultural calendar that governs most Egyptian life. Bodies arrive according to the schedule of death rather than the flooding of the Nile, and the 70-day preservation cycle operates independently of seasonal concerns. It's an industry that functions outside normal time, focused entirely on preparing for eternity. Your lunch break provides a brief escape from the workshop's specialized atmosphere, though the smell of natron and preserving agents follows you into the streets of Memphis. The other citizens have learned to identify embalmers by scent alone, giving you the kind of respectful distance usually reserved for priests and tax collectors. The afternoon brings new bodies and fresh challenges. Wealthy merchant, whose family has commissioned the premium preservation package, complete with gold leaf and precious stone inlays. His mummification will require months of work and cost more than most people see in a lifetime. But his family is convinced that such expenses represent wise investments in eternal comfort. The technological innovations in mummification continue to evolve, with each generation of embalmers refining techniques and developing new approaches to the fundamental challenge of preserving human tissue. The most recent advances focus on improving the effectiveness of oil treatments and developing new types of protective amulets that can be incorporated into the wrapping process. The theological debates surrounding mummification have intensified as the practice becomes more widespread. Some priests argue that physical preservation is essential for afterlife survival, while others maintain that spiritual preparation is more important than bodily maintenance. These discussions have practical implications for funeral costs and preparation requirements. The international trade in mummification supplies has made Memphis a crucial node in Mediterranean and African commerce. Ships arrive regularly carrying cedar oil from Lebanon, natron from the western oases, and exotic resins from Nubia and beyond. The death industry, it turns out, is remarkably good for economic development. The workshop's evening shift brings different rhythms and personnel, specialists who focus on the later stages of mummification, the oil treatments, decorative work, and preliminary wrapping that requires steady hands and excellent night vision. The oil lamps create pools of flickering light that transform the stone tables into altars of preservation. The social dynamics of the Embalmers Guild reflect broader Egyptian hierarchies, with master craftsmen commanding respect and high wages, while apprentices work for basic sustenance and the promise of eventually learning techniques that will ensure their own economic security. It's a profession that literally deals in futures afterlife futures, but futures nonetheless. The evening air outside carries the mixed sense of cooking food, incense from nearby temples, and the ever-present undertone of the Nile's muddy fecundity. Memphis at sunset becomes a city of shadows and possibilities. where the boundary between the living and dead seems most negotiable. Your workday ends as it began, with the scrape of natron against skin and the quiet sounds of preservation continuing around you. Tomorrow will bring new bodies, fresh challenges, and the ongoing business of preparing ordinary mortals for extraordinary journeys. The rhythm of death and preservation continues, as steady and reliable as the Nile's annual flood. The walk home takes you through streets that have remained largely unchanged for generations, past houses and workshops that represent the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Memphis is a city built on the assumption of permanence, designed to last for the millions of years that its priests regularly promise their clients. Your own house, modest by merchant standards but comfortable by priestly ones, represents your investment in temporal life, the counterpoint to all those hours spent preparing for eternity. Your wife greets you with the kind of warm affection that makes the abstract promise of afterlife reunion seem both unnecessary and desperately important. The evening meal consists of the same basic elements that have sustained Egyptian families since before the pyramids bread: beer, onions, and whatever fish or fowl the day's market provided. It's food that connects you to generations of ancestors and descendants, all of whom will eventually require the services that currently occupy your days. The night sounds of Memphis settle around your house like a familiar blanket. The distant calls of night fishermen on the Nile, the whisper of wind through palm fronds, the occasional cry of a jackal from the desert margins. These sounds will continue long after your own preservation is complete, carrying forward the rhythms of a civilization confident in its own eternity. Sleep comes with the exhaustion of physical labor and the satisfaction of craftwork, completed with proper attention to detail. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and familiar routines, the endless cycle of transformation that defines your profession. In your dreams, the natron continues its patient work, drawing moisture from the past and preparing vessels for futures that stretch beyond imagination. The stars above Memphis shine with the same light that will illuminate your preserved remains in whatever distant age they finally crumble into dust. Until then, the work continues one body at a time, one careful application of natron, one precise wrapping, building bridges between mortality and whatever lies beyond the final breath.